Kill your racist ancestor, cut off a piece of his flesh, and eat it.
It's a chicken.
Because there's gonna be no more Harry Potter after this episode. Yes, the season finale of Lovecraft Country is here, and I'm already trying to figure out a spell to make me forget it so I can watch it all over again. In this video, we'll be answering some of the episode's biggest WTF moments, like Dee's robotic arm, where that black Shoggoth came from, what exactly happened during the ceremony, and if Atticus and Ruby are still alive. I've got some cool theories about all of these, but before we begin, smash your robot arm on that like and subscribe button so you're notified as soon as one of my videos comes out. Episode 10 is called Full Circle, and the first image we see of this sign here is a fitting throwback to episode 1. Both the sign and Dee's ad for George's guidebook are drawn in green, a nod to the Green Book. Nope, not the movie, get out of here, the annual guidebook for African American travelers, which outlines safe places for people of color to lodge and dine during their travels, particularly in the Jim Crow South. Dee is brought back home after the group successfully retrieved the Book of Names at the end of last episode. However, as soon as they start the spell to remove the curse, Atticus and Letty are transported to an ancestral plane that was created by Atticus's ancestor, Hannah. The page the Book of Names flips to when it magically opens shows a symbol, the same symbol in the shape of Atticus's birthmark. The night Hannah first opened the Book of Names, she unknowingly created this magic space, initially believing it to be hell, but later realizing it can be a place of power. Hannah would go on to kill herself, but before she did, she cast 2 spells. One, to give her ancestors this birthmark, which would hide their bloodline from all who know magic. Hannah knew she'd be hunted by the followers of Adam, since she carries a child with Titus Braithwaite's blood. Second, she bound the book shut forever so that the pain it caused would stop. Atticus also gets a final one-on-one with his deceased mother, Dora. Their conversation is about having the strength to sacrifice yourself for something greater.
But if we ain't walking toward an altar to sacrifice ourselves for something important, what is our purpose?
At this point in the story, Atticus hasn't fully come to terms with his fate. In fact, he's continually told others that he's not going to die.
And I'm not dying. So that was a fucking lie.
It's only through his conversation with his mother and Hannah that he'll learn to accept that death is part of his journey. That's why he takes the time to write a letter to his father and train Dee with his Shoggoth. And as we'll find out, Atticus's sacrifice was not in vain, as it will have made it so that white people can no longer use magic, shifting the balance of power. How this will manifest in season 2 remains to be seen, but this will be a huge game changer, and I'll get more into this sacrifice and whether or not he's gone for good a bit later in the video. Atticus and Letty, along with their ancestors, perform a spell to remove the curse from Dee, transporting the two of them back to reality. The only problem is that Dee's arm, the place she was initially infected, has withered away. In the flashbacks we see at the ending, there's a quick shot of Hippolyta and what appears to be the remnants of a surgery having taken place around her. She was the one to give Dee that robotic arm. Remember that she's equipped with tech from an alternate universe which likely aided in her invention. We also have to remember in episode 8 what Atticus said about his time in the future.
I was only there for a second before the woman in the hood came in, shoved the book in my hand, pushed me back through the portal.
With the robotic arm.
Dee has to be this woman. Atticus also mentions in this same scene that he saw white folks rioting, which could have something to do with the change from white folks no longer having the ability to use magic. And I could totally see a season 2 where the new villain is a black man or woman who uses magic to oppress white people as payment for centuries of racial injustice, and that it would be up to Atticus, Letty, and the group to stop him or her. I'm pretty jealous of showrunner Misha Green, who can take this show in so many unique and interesting directions. In order to stop Christina, Atticus devises a plan to use her spell against her. This requires a piece of himself, Christina, and Titus Braithwaite. The only problem is Titus is dead, and getting a hold of Christina won't be that easy. They're able to conjure Titus from beyond using the combined powers of their ancestors, but not before he evaporates to warn Christina that they have the Book of Names. He's brought back to the circle where Atticus rips off a piece of his flesh, and that was supposed to be the easy part. part. Dee is mad at her mother for her abandonment and not being there when she needed her. This is what really sparks Hippolyta to make it up to her by giving her that robotic arm. A pissed Christina, now knowing that Atticus and Letty have the book, offers to spare Atticus's life and leave their family alone in exchange for the book, as she believes it will contain an alternative way to grant her immortality. And when Atticus says no, she removes Letty's invulnerability, and we'll discuss why she gives it back a bit later on. Needing all the help they can get, Atticus meets up with Jihad, telling her that what they had was real, and he thought that if he could deny what they had, he could deny everything, including her vision of his death. Notice what she's wearing here. Yeah, she kinda looks like the Pope, but the red is a nice contrast to Letty's blue in the next scene. Red is also the color of Gia's skin in Atticus's dream. We learn that Gia's mother passed away, and also get a reminder of what the Mudang said about her, that she is destined to be in the darkness. It's this line that spurs Gia to ultimately throw herself into the black magic at the end of the episode. There's also an interesting line here about choice.
We have a choice. We can be monsters or heroes.
Which is in direct contrast to what Dora said earlier in the episode.
We tell ourselves we have a choice, but we don't.
All of this ties into fate, as we saw last episode with the revelation that Atticus was the mysterious baseball bat hero. We are in a time loop. No matter the choices they make, things will always happen the way they've happened. Atticus is destined to be a hero no matter what, and it'll be interesting to see how the writers play with this next season. Letty pleads with Ruby to help her acquire a piece of Christina for the spell. After all, she's family. Ruby will initially deny this request, as her sister seems to only use her when it's convenient for her.
You only want to be my sister when you need something, Letty.
Here we see Dee crossing out the faces of the all-white, all-male jury which acquitted the murderers of her friend Emmett Till, aka Bobo. This gives us a little context as to why she kills Christina at the end. Not only was she cursed and almost died by racist cops, but a racist jury let a bunch of white murderers free for killing her best friend. There's a lot of rage there, and it could possibly set up Dee as being the villain next season, especially if part of it were to take place 20 years in the future, the same time she hands over that book to Atticus in an effort to change the time loop. Before she kills Christina, she even says,
"You still haven't learned."
They referring to white people. Thought I'd mention this real quick, but the new Arithia Blue comic was drawn by Afua Richardson, who got a shout out in the show. She's a comic book artist, and if you haven't checked out her work, you totally should. Letty and Atticus get baptized. Letty told Christina 2 episodes ago that she's turned to God, in large part to being resurrected way back in episode 2. She now believes, even if that was a result of magic, as Christina said. The symbolism here is striking, as baptism is meant to wash away the sins of the past, and for its receiver to resurrect anew. And this is just one part of my theory that Atticus will come back. There are just too many illusions of resurrection, and the fact Jonathan Majors is a huge draw to the show, that lead me to believe he's coming back. I'll get more into the practical reasons for his return when we explore the final scene. Ruby gives Letty what is essentially supposed to be a part of Christina, but since we know this is actually Christina in Ruby's body, the potion Atticus ultimately drinks is a fake. In the flashbacks at the end, Christina has put Ruby into a coma, similar to that of Williams after she catches her siding with Letty. In fact, Christina says if she hadn't caught Ruby, maybe their plan would have worked.
It might have worked if you had left Ruby out of it.
A lot of people online have been criticizing Ruby's off-screen death, but I don't think she's dead at all. She's just in a coma, and since we aren't exactly sure of the specifics of how Christina makes these potions, like do they have to be dead, then brought back, then put into a coma, or does she just put them into some vegetative state, it's kind of muddied. But in a world where there is a way to cure a curse that turns someone into a Bopsy twin, you better believe there's a way to cure Ruby. I just can't believe they'd kill her off like that. Now, huge points if you noticed Ruby was actually Christina in the Life Could Be a Dream singing sequence, since way back in episode 1 she talked about how much she hated that song, and now she's loving it.
Life could be a dream, she-boom, she-board.
This song is also ironic since the very first episode starts inside a literal dream. Back at Artem, Atticus and Montrose prepare for the spell by closing the perimeter in salt, and Atticus eating Titus's flesh and Christina's potion. Fun fact, when they were filming this, it was getting really cold out, so instead of shooting outside, side, they recreated the entire ruins in an outdoor soundstage. Letty finds out Ruby is actually Christina, and after a physical battle, they've been emotionally battling each other all season, Letty is dropped from the tower without the protection of her invulnerability spell. Ultimately, Atticus is brought forth to be sacrificed, while Gia, Montrose, and Hippolyta, captured by the Adamites, watch on. Dee is left in the car, probably not the best place to leave a kid since the woods are covered with bloodthirsty Shoggoths, but she'll be saved by Atticus's Shoggoth, who has been kept in Letty's basement. Now, the main theory here is that this monster was the result of Montrose's failed spell on Atticus at the end of episode 8. Remember how he said he was dyslexic? He probably screwed up the words, instead spawning this Shoggoth, blood binding it to Atticus. And with Atticus knowing he's going to die, he wanted to introduce it to Dee, as his death would now make Dee its new master, as it is heavily implied Dee is Atticus's sister and next in the bloodline. As Christina performs her immortality spell, Letty miraculously comes back to life, noticing that her Mark of Cain, or the invulnerability spell as we know it, has come back. In the flashbacks, we know this was Christina's doing. She brought her back because she promised Ruby not to hurt her. If she didn't bring her back, it would be definitive proof Christina never cared about Ruby and she was being used this entire time. But bringing her back confirms that her feelings were true and that she probably feels some betrayal from Ruby when she went behind her back to help Letty. Christina's spell is successful, but this black smoke emanates from Atticus, similar to that black smoke that flowed around during Samuel's spell in episode 2. Gia throws herself into it, which causes her Kumio spirit tentacles to grab hold of both Christina and Atticus. And this is why I think Atticus will come back. I think what Gia is doing here is transferring the immortality from Christina to Atticus. We know she absorbs souls, and at this point Atticus is already dead, so why does she pick him up? What's the purpose of that unless it's to somehow transfer power? I mean, it could possibly be to get these flashbacks, but that really doesn't serve any purpose other than to us, the viewer. We also know that Gia herself doesn't know the true extent of her power. Who knows what this Kumiho did when controlling the two bodies? All of that aside, there's also the ability to travel in time and alternate universes, something Atticus even brings up this episode. Jonathan Majors guessed that he'll be back. These puns are terrible. In that aftermath of the giant magic explosion, Gia, Montrose, Hippolyta, and Letty take Atticus's body as his voiceover reads his letter to his father. Now that he's gone, Montrose can get a second chance at being a father and raise young George the way he never was. It ends with a quote from Alexander Dumas, the author of The Count of Monte Cristo, Montrose's favorite book. Letty tells Christina that not only has she been bound from magic, but every white person in the world, giving weight to Dora's words that Atticus will change everything. She says magic is ours now, which could mean Letty and her family, but also all black people as a whole. It's a way to reclaim their power for centuries of injustice, discrimination, and prejudice at the hands of white people who abused it. I just want to say thank you to everyone who has followed my breakdown videos all this way. This show was a blast to cover, and I hope you'll consider liking, sharing, and subscribing, as I'm always doing new breakdowns for the latest shows. Thanks for watching. Come follow me on Twitter and Instagram at ThinkStoryYT, and until next time, remember, Daddy loves you very much.